What's up, BookTube? Fresh off of reading the latest Riley Sager book, Survive the Night, it's about that time. I am going to re-rank the Riley Sager books, and that's coming up next. Okay, so people familiar with my channel know that I have essentially declared Riley Sager as an auto-buy author for me. In other words, anything that he puts out, I'm gonna go ahead and scoop it up. And if it happens that it's a storyline that sounds intriguing to me, well, then that's just kind of the icing on the proverbial cake. But in this case, it was a book that I was very interested in because I did like the storyline. I liked the throwback to the 1990s, so I was already intrigued, and it was just a matter of picking it up. Since it was an auto buy, it was a win all the way around for me. So with that all said, it's time to begin the re-rankings of the Riley Sager books. Coming in at number 5 is the aforementioned Survive the Night. Those of you who have read the Taylor Adams book, No Exit, you'll probably see some familiarity with this particular story, and you have a closed circle kind of thing. You have a trip, a long distance trip in a car with potentially a serial killer. So it was an interesting storyline, and I was really excited to read it. It does take some kind of weird twists and turns. There are a couple points in the story where it kind of drags a little bit, and some of the pieces don't quite add up, yet it was difficult to put down. It's like you really just want to see how it's going to end. And so while this is not the best Riley Sager book that I've read, I still did enjoy it, and I do not regret buying it. I ended up giving this one 3 stars out of 5 because it did, again, held my attention because I was curious to see how it was going to end, and it did take some crazy twists at the end. At least I thought it did, and yet it just wasn't quite up to the other previous selections that I have picked up in the Riley Sager series. So it ends up with 3 stars, and it comes in at number 5. Coming in at number 4 is the original Final Girls by Riley Sager. This is the first book. By the way, I've read the Riley Sager books in order, so I did start with Final Girls because I've always been intrigued by the Final Girls concept. Being a longtime horror movie fan, that was something that was just too tempting for me to bypass. So I did end up picking up this one first, and I enjoyed it. It had some things that were a little bit weird, a little bit crazy, which would ultimately become kind of classic Riley Sager in some ways, in that he throws some definite curveballs at you, and you have to be skilled to catch them and to stick with the story in some cases. But this one was good, some very compelling characters, an interesting storyline, and just, again, a crazy plot twist at the end, which again is a Riley Sager signature. But this ended up being a good one, and I've kind of upgraded this a little bit in my head, but it still comes in at number 4 on the list of Riley Sager books. Coming in at number 3 is a book that I've upgraded in the last year since I read it, and that is Home Before Dark. I picked this up as a book of the month selection, and this is one that after I had read the initial 3 Riley Sager books, this one was one that I was excited about, and this is where I was getting into that mode where I was looking at Riley Sager as being an auto buy, and I was glad I picked this one up. Now, when I first read it, I wasn't quite as excited about it, and it didn't really sink in, but in retrospect, thinking about it a little bit more, I've kind of upgraded my feelings about Home Before Dark, and I feel like it's a little bit better. It's the spooky, haunted mansion type story, and that it has also the storyline of a book that's being played out throughout the story, in addition to the other timeline, which is the actual story. So it's really a fascinating read. It takes a little bit of a twist at the end, which again is a typical Riley Sager signature. So I, again, wasn't as high on it the first time I read it, but in retrospect, it's definitely risen up the chain for me. Home Before Dark. Coming in at number 2 of the Riley Sager books is Lock Every Door. Now, this I picked up before Riley Sager was an auto buy for me. I had read his first 2 books, and Lock Every Door didn't initially excite me, and so I didn't immediately pull the trigger and say, I gotta get Lock Every Door. But then I started thinking about it more and more, and then Home Before Dark became a pre-order, and I started looking at Home Before Dark, and I said, well, wait a minute, let me go back and look at Lock Every Door, because maybe that was more interesting than I thought. And as I went back and looked at it, I became more intrigued by this particular story, and I picked it up, and I bought it as a used book, and I was glad that I did, even though it did come with a kind of a hideous looking tear in it. But I picked it up, and I was glad that I picked it up because I really enjoyed this particular book. And again, it's got some Riley Sager twists at the end, and probably throughout. It's like the ending is like, you might say that you saw it coming, but you probably are lying. But it was a really enjoyable read. I liked it. The characters, of course, as typical in a lot of these books, they do some nonsensical things, but it makes for an interesting story, and I really appreciated Lock Every Door coming in at number 2. Coming in at number 1, if you've been doing the math, you know what's up now, and that is The Last Time I Lied. This is actually Riley Sager's second book, and I really enjoyed this. This is one of the few books that I've read that when I got to the end, I was actually really sad that it was over, and I was sitting around, and I don't do this very often, but I was hoping that there would be a sequel to this book, and I won't give away the ending, but I will say it leaves the door open for a potential sequel, even though I did read somewhere, I think on Goodreads, that Riley Sager said he is not looking at doing a sequel to this particular book. I think he should reconsider, but that's just one person's opinion. The Last Time I Lied, a lot of things that I really like: young people, closed setting, at a summer camp, with a history, a backstory, and a mystery element that you play along with and try to solve as things go along. I really liked it. There are some things that some people had problems with in terms of how this added up, and some procedural things with how the camp was run and all that stuff. That didn't bother me at all. I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was a really, really good story, very well told, and I was definitely excited to have picked this one up. I liked it, and this is probably one of the rare books that I'm thinking I want to reread this book because it was that good. This is the book that really got me, that started to get me hooked on Riley Sager books. The Last Time I Lied comes in at number 1. So there you have it, my re-ranking of the Riley Sager books. Really not a lot of changes at the top of the rankings. I did upgrade Home Before Dark because again, in retrospect, I feel a little bit better about that book than I did when I initially read it. But I've also upgraded a little bit Final Girls. I feel a little bit better about Final Girls now, having let it soak in now for about, I think it was about a year and a half ago that I read Final Girls. And so over time, that one has become better to me, and I'm definitely feeling much more positive about that particular book, Final Girls. So Final Girls and Home Before Dark have been upgraded a little bit. The Last Time I Lied and Lock Every Door still stand at the top. Survive the Night comes in last, but somebody's got to be last, and or some book in this case has to be last. And so for me, it's Survive the Night. Still a solid book, a solid entry in the Riley Sager series. And Riley Sager, in case you were wondering, still is an auto buy for me. I will definitely be looking forward to the next Riley Sager book.